Liam Morgan didn't stop to think. He just reached into that wagon bed with both hands and pulled her up. A woman bleeding through her summer dress, two babies pressed against her chest like she'd die before she let go of them. She didn't ask for help. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him with eyes that had already seen the worst of men. And Liam felt something crack open inside his chest that he thought grief had sealed shut for good. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The summer heat was the kind that pressed down on a man like a hand flat on his back, steady and mean, not letting up even as the afternoon stretched long and golden over the dry grass. Liam Morgan had been out since before dawn, hauling fence posts to the east pasture. It was the kind of work that didn't require thinking, and that suited him fine. Thinking too much had become a dangerous habit since Sarah died. He was leading his team back toward the barn when the horse, Old Duke, a buckskin gelding with better instincts than most men Liam knew, stopped dead in the yard and wouldn't move. "Come on now," Liam said, giving the rein a short pull. "Don't do this to me today." Duke didn't budge. He threw his head back and made a low, uneasy sound in his chest. Liam tied him off and walked around to the wagon bed. He expected a snake, a raccoon, maybe some piece of fence wire tangled where it shouldn't be. What he found instead made him go still. A woman, curled on her side between two feed sacks, her dark hair plastered to her face with sweat, her dress torn at the shoulder and stained brown-red along the left side. She had both arms wrapped around two small bundles, babies, newborn or close to it, wrapped in what looked like strips torn from a petticoat. Both babies were breathing. He could see that right away. Their tiny chests rose and fell in the heat. The woman's were slower. Too slow. "Ma'am?" He kept his voice low and even. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. Dark eyes, brown and deep and absolutely terrified. She pulled the babies tighter against her and tried to push herself back, away from him. But the effort cost her. She made a sharp sound through her teeth. "Don't," she said. Her voice was hoarse, scraped raw. "Don't touch them." "I'm not going to touch them," Liam said. "I'm not going to touch you either, unless you need me to. My name is Liam Morgan. This is my property. I don't know how you got here, but you're hurt, and it's 100 degrees, and I'd like to help you if you'll let me." She stared at him. He could see her measuring him, the way a cornered animal measures a man, trying to determine whether he was a threat, whether she had any real choice. "Is there anybody with you?" she asked. "No, ma'am, just me." "Are you expecting anyone?" "Not today." Something shifted in her face. Not trust, not yet, just the arithmetic of desperation. She'd run out of options, and she knew it. He could see the exact moment she made her decision. "All right," she said quietly. "All right." He got her into the house. It took 2 trips, one for the babies, one for her, and she didn't like being carried, but she was in no condition to argue. He settled her on the narrow cot in the back room and laid the babies on the bed beside her, and she immediately gathered them in close, her breathing still too shallow, her face the color of old ash. He brought water. She drank 2 full cups without stopping. "The babies need feeding," she said when she came up for air. Her voice was a little steadier now. "I can do that myself. I just need a few minutes." "Take all the time you need." He set the cup on the nightstand. "I'm going to get some clean cloth and look at that wound on your side. I won't come in until you call me." She gave a short nod, watching him still with those careful eyes. He waited on the other side of the door, listening to the soft sounds of the babies and the woman's quiet murmured words to them. Sounds too low for him to make out, private as prayer. When she called him back in, she'd wrapped a strip of cloth around her midsection, clumsy but tight. She'd already worked out that he'd seen the injury. She didn't try to pretend it wasn't there. "I can do better than that," he said, nodding at the wrapping. "I'd rather you didn't," she said. "All right." He pulled the chair to the bedside and sat, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. One of the babies made a small sound, and the woman's hand went to it instantly, automatic. The touch of a mother who had already learned to respond before the cry fully formed. "I don't know your name," he said. A pause. "Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Gray." "Miss Gray." "Mrs.," she said. Then something crossed her face, a flinch, barely there. "It doesn't matter. Just Eleanor is fine." He let that go. "Those babies have names?" For the first time since he'd found her, something loosened in her expression. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close to one. "Rose," she said, touching the cheek of the one on her left. "And Iris," she touched the other. "I name them for things that keep coming back, even after a hard winter." Liam looked at the two of them, small and perfect and oblivious to all of it, and he felt that old crack in his chest again. "They're beautiful," he said, and he meant it. Eleanor looked at him. She seemed surprised that he meant it. He made her eat. She fought him on it, said she wasn't hungry, said she didn't want to be a burden, and he told her that in this house, a person ate when food was put in front of them, and that was all there was to it. She ate. He slept in the barn that night. By morning she was worse. Fever had moved in during the small hours, the way fever does, quiet and certain. He rode to town for the doctor and paid him in cash before the man had finished hitching his horse, just to make sure he'd come quickly. Doc Pruitt was old and unhurried and had the good sense not to ask too many questions. He looked at Eleanor's wound, cleaned it, told Liam she'd been cut. Not a fall, not an accident, a deliberate cut. The kind made by someone who knew where to put it to cause damage without killing outright. And then told Liam she needed rest, fluids, and clean air, and that she'd probably be all right if she didn't push herself. "She's nursing twins," Liam said at the door. Pruitt looked at him over his spectacles. "Then she needs twice as much of all of that. You got someone to help?" "I'll manage." Pruitt gave him a long look. "Boy," he said, though Liam was 41 years old, "you don't even know this woman." "I know she's hurt," Liam said. "That's enough for now." The old doctor shook his head slowly, but there was something in his face that wasn't disapproval. He climbed up onto his buggy and clicked his tongue at his horse. "Feed her broth," he said. "Keep the wound dry, and don't let her do anything stupid for at least a week." He drove off without charging a fee. That surprised Liam, but he didn't call after him. The fever broke on the third day. Liam was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee gone cold when he heard her moving, and then he heard her voice from the back room. Not in pain, not calling for help, just talking low and soft to the babies, telling them something he couldn't hear. He knocked before he opened the door. She was sitting up, color back in her face, both babies in her arms, both apparently just fed, both sleeping with that boneless, absolute trust that only new babies achieve. "You look better," he said. "I feel better," she said. "Thank you. For the doctor. For all of it. You didn't have to." "No," he agreed. "I didn't." She held his gaze. "Most men wouldn't." "I'm not most men." He said it without pride or performance, just a fact. He pulled the chair over and sat. "Miss Eleanor, I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate a straight answer." Her jaw tightened slightly. "All right. Is there someone looking for you?" A beat of silence. "Why do you ask?" Because you hid in my wagon. Because someone put a knife in you and it wasn't an accident. Because you're traveling with 2 newborn babies in the middle of summer with no supplies, no horse, no bag that I can see." He paused. "That's not a woman on a peaceful journey. That's a woman running." Eleanor looked down at the babies for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally. "There's someone looking for me." "Who?" Another pause, longer. She smoothed Iris's blanket with her thumb, back and forth, back and forth. "His name is Carter Pierce," she said, and even saying the name seemed to cost her something. He was my fiancé. Before." "Before," Liam repeated. "Before I understood what he was." She looked up then, direct and steady, and he saw the thing underneath the fear for the first time. The anger, banked low and permanent. "He has money and men and connections through half this county. He has a lawyer in Millhaven who does whatever he's paid to do. And he has a paper," her voice caught slightly, "a paper that he says gives him legal guardianship over Rose and Iris." Liam was quiet for a moment. "Does it?" "It's fraudulent," she said flatly. "I was unconscious when it was witnessed. I don't know whose signature is on it or what they were told, but I did not sign any document giving Carter Pierce anything. Not my daughters, not myself, nothing." "Do you have proof of that?" "My word," she said. "That's all." He looked at her. She looked back at him, unblinking, waiting for the particular disappointment she'd probably learned to expect from men when they realized how complicated she was. He didn't give it to her. "All right," he said. "Then your word is what we start with." She didn't know what to do with him. Eleanor had grown up knowing how men worked, which ones were generous in public and punishing in private, which ones offered help with a hand already on the debt they intended to collect. Carter Pierce had taught her the most thorough lesson of all. A man who smiled while he planned. A man who said, "I love you," the same way he said, "You belong to me," as if those were the same sentence. Liam Morgan didn't fit any pattern she knew. He didn't press her for more information after that first conversation. He brought food and left it. He asked about the babies, their weights, whether they were feeding well, whether she needed anything for them, and listened seriously to the answers, as if it were useful and important information he intended to act on. He fixed the broken shutter on the window without being asked, and the noise stopped, and he didn't mention it. On the 4th day, he sat on the porch steps while she sat in the doorway with Rose, and she told him, piece by piece, how she'd come to be in his wagon. She'd been in Millhaven, boarding house on the edge of town. Carter had found her there. She'd known he would, eventually. She'd just hoped she had more time. He'd come with 2 men and a paper and that particular smile of his, and he'd told her she was coming with him, and so were the girls. And when she refused, she stopped. "He cut you," Liam said, not a question. He told his man to. She looked straight ahead, out at the dry grass and the blue summer sky, as a demonstration of what would happen next if I didn't stop embarrassing him. She breathed. "I ran while they were distracted. I don't know how. I don't know where I found the strength. I just knew if I didn't move then, I wouldn't get another chance." Rose made a small sound, and Eleanor looked down at her, and the anger in her face softened into something else entirely. Something so fierce and protective it was almost hard to look at directly. "I am not letting him have them," she said. "I will die before I let him have them." "You're not going to die," Liam said. He said it quietly, the way he said most things. "And he's not going to have them." Eleanor looked at him. "You can't promise that." "No," he admitted. "But I can promise I won't make it easy for him." She searched his face, looking for the catch, looking for the angle. "Why?" she said. "You don't know me." Liam was quiet for a moment. He turned his hat in his hands, a habit he had when he was choosing his words carefully. "My wife died 2 winters ago," he said. "Fever took her fast. We'd been trying for children. It never happened. And I've spent the better part of 2 years thinking there wasn't much left on this earth worth doing anything for." He paused. "Finding you in my wagon, I don't know. It felt like something. Like maybe I was supposed to be useful to somebody." Eleanor looked at him for a long time. "That's a dangerous kind of thinking," she said softly. "Probably," he agreed. He stood and dusted off his hat and settled it back on his head. "But I've been playing it safe for 2 years, and it hasn't done me much good." He walked off toward the barn, and Eleanor sat in the doorway, with Rose sleeping against her shoulder, and she watched him go, and she thought about a man who still had enough left in him to decide that a stranger's trouble was worth wading into. She hadn't thought men like that existed. She wasn't sure yet that she was right about him. But for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't sure she was wrong either. On the 5th night, she heard hoofbeats on the road. She was awake. She slept lightly now, had slept lightly for months, one ear always open, and she was on her feet before she was fully conscious of standing. Both babies gathered up against her, moving to the corner of the room, away from the window. The hoofbeats slowed, stopped. Then she heard a voice outside, low and conversational, and a cold wave moved through her, from her throat to her stomach. She knew that voice. She'd have known it in the dark, in a crowd, in a nightmare. She'd built her whole life around avoiding it for the last 6 months. Carter Pierce was at the gate. She pressed herself against the wall and held the babies tight and did not make a sound. She heard his voice again, easy, unhurried, that particular tone he used when he was doing something he'd already decided the outcome of. And then she heard another voice, lower, shorter, Liam's. She couldn't hear the words, just the shape of them. She stood there in the dark with her daughters, and she listened to the 2 men talking on the other side of the wall, and she understood that something had just begun, that none of them would be able to stop once it found its momentum. Carter Pierce had found her, and Liam Morgan was between him and the door. Liam had heard the hoofbeats too. He'd been awake. Sleep had never come easily to him since Sarah, and lately it came even harder. And he was already at the door by the time the horse slowed at the gate. He stepped out onto the porch before the rider had a chance to dismount, and he stood there with his arms loose at his sides, and his face the particular kind of blank that men out here learned to put on when they needed to think fast without showing it. The man at the gate was well dressed for the hour and the heat. That was the first thing Liam noticed. Pressed shirt, clean vest, boots that hadn't walked far in the dirt. The kind of man who had other men do his walking for him. He had a face that would photograph well. Square jaw, easy smile, the sort of looks that made people trust him before he'd earned it. Liam didn't trust it for a second. "Evening," the man said, leaning one arm on the fence post like they were neighbors who ran into each other at the feed store. "Sorry to come calling so late. Hope I didn't disturb you." "You did," Liam said. "What can I do for you?" The man's smile held. He was practiced at it. "Name's Carter Pierce. I'm looking for a woman, dark-haired, traveling with 2 infants. My fiancé. She's been unwell. Got confused, wandered off. I've been half out of my mind with worry." Liam looked at him for a long moment. "Don't know anyone like that," he said. Carter's eyes moved to the house. Just a flicker, quick and calculated. "That's so. Mind if I look around? Just to set my mind at ease." "I do mind," Liam said. "This is private property. You want to look around somebody's land? You come back in daylight with a paper that says you're allowed to." Something shifted behind Carter's eyes. Barely there, a crack in the plaster. And then the smile came back, smoother than before. I understand. Forgive the intrusion. I've just been, you can imagine, a man's future wife, out alone with 2 babies. He shook his head with a look of practiced concern. If you do happen to see anyone fitting that description, I'd be grateful if you'd send word to the hotel in Millhaven. Carter Pierce. They'll know how to reach me. I'll keep it in mind, Liam said. Carter held his gaze for just a beat too long. Then he tipped his hat, wheeled his horse around, and rode back toward the road at an easy walk, unhurried, like a man with nowhere to be. Liam watched him until the sound of hooves faded entirely. Then he went back inside and stood in the hallway and blew out a slow breath. He didn't believe for 1 second that Carter Pierce was gone. He went to Eleanor's door and knocked. "I heard," she said before he could speak. Her voice was steady, but only just. "He'll be back," Liam said through the door, "probably with that paper and a deputy." A silence. Then, "How long do we have?" "Maybe till morning. Maybe less." Another silence, longer. "Liam," her voice dropped, "if he comes with legal paper, if he has a deputy—" "Then we deal with that when it happens," he said. "Tonight, you sleep. Bolt the door if it makes you feel better. I'll be in the front room." He heard her exhale, heard the soft sounds of the babies shifting. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't answer that. He went to the front room and sat on the chair by the window, and didn't sleep at all. Carter Pierce came back at 7 in the morning. He came with 2 men this time. One wore a deputy's badge. The other was wide-shouldered and quiet, in the way that meant he was paid to be useful in a specific kind of situation. They rode into the yard at a casual pace, like they owned the air around them. Liam was on the porch with his coffee. He'd made sure to be. "Mr. Morgan," Carter said, pleasant as Sunday. "I hope you'll forgive me. I've done some asking around town, and I have reason to believe the woman I'm looking for is here on your property." He reached inside his vest and produced a folded paper, clean and official-looking. "I have a court document establishing legal guardianship over Eleanor Gray's minor children. And Deputy Holt here has agreed to come along and make sure everything proceeds orderly." The deputy, young, uncomfortable, not meeting Liam's eyes directly, touched his hat brim. "Mornin', Mr. Morgan." Liam looked at the paper without taking it. "May I read that?" Carter held it out with a smile. Liam took it, unfolded it, read it slowly and deliberately from top to bottom, while the 3 men waited. He could feel Carter's patience stretching the longer he took. The paper had Eleanor's name on it. It had 2 infant girls listed as Rose Gray and Iris Gray. It had a judge's signature, Judge Aldous Creel of Millhaven County, and a date from 3 weeks prior. It had a witness signature below that, a name Liam didn't recognize. What it did not have was Eleanor's signature, anywhere. He folded it back up and held it out. "This doesn't have her consent on it," Liam said. "Guardianship doesn't require the ward's consent," Carter said smoothly. "Just the court's." "It requires the mother's consent when the mother is alive and competent," Liam said, "which she is." Carter's smile thinned just slightly. "With respect, Mr. Morgan, you're not a lawyer." "Neither are you," Liam said. "Deputy." He looked at the young man. "I'd like you to look at that document and tell me where Eleanor Gray's signature appears on it." The deputy looked at Carter. Then he looked at Liam. Then he looked at the paper in Carter's hand with the particular expression of a man who was beginning to understand he'd ridden into something he hadn't been told the full truth about. Mr. Pierce told me the woman signed. I'd like you to look at the paper, Liam said again, quietly. Carter's hand tightened on the document. This is a waste of everyone's time. The woman is here. She needs medical care. And those children need to be in a proper home. She has medical care, Liam said. And the children are in a proper home. Your home? Carter's voice sharpened, the pleasantness dropping a notch. You met this woman a week ago. You have no claim. I'm not making a claim, Liam said. I'm pointing out that you don't have one either. Not a legal one. Not without her name on that paper. The wide-shouldered man behind Carter shifted his weight. Liam noticed it and didn't look at him. Looking at the man who might hit you was how you invited him to do it. Deputy, Carter said, turning to the young man, I need a minute, the deputy said. He looked at Liam. Is the woman here? Can she speak for herself? Carter's jaw went tight. But he couldn't say no to a deputy. Not out loud. Not with Liam watching. She can, Liam said. He turned toward the door. Eleanor. She had heard all of it. She had been standing just inside the doorway, Rose and Iris both in the back room, on the cot she'd made for them. And she had listened to Liam's voice, steady as a fence post in dry ground. And she had made herself breathe slowly and deliberately and think clearly. She had spent 6 months being afraid of Carter Pierce, being afraid of what he could do, who he knew, how much money he had, how smoothly he lied. She had let fear make her small and quiet and easy to corner. She was still afraid. She was not going to let it make her small today. She stepped out onto the porch. Carter looked at her, and his face did 3 things in rapid succession: relief, satisfaction, calculation. So fast, she doubted the deputy caught any of it. She saw all 3 perfectly. She'd had a long time to study his face. Eleanor, he said, and he made her name sound like a hand placed on a shoulder without permission. Thank God! I've been so worried. I'm sure you have, she said. She looked at the deputy. He was young, 25 maybe, with a clean-shaved face and an expression that had started the morning confident and was currently unraveling at the edges. Sir, she said, my name is Eleanor Gray. Those are my daughters in this house. I did not sign any document giving Carter Pierce guardianship over them or authority over me. I was unconscious the night that paper was supposedly witnessed. I don't know whose name is on it, but it is not mine. The deputy opened his mouth. Carter cut across him. Eleanor, you were ill. I was drugged, she said. Flat. Clear. Don't. Silence. Even the deputy went still. Carter's face did something then that she'd only seen it do twice before. The mask slipped, just for a second. And underneath it was something cold and precise that had nothing to do with worry or love or any of the things he performed so well in public. You're confused, he said, and his voice had gone very quiet. You've been sick, and this man, he gestured toward Liam with barely disguised contempt, has clearly taken advantage of a vulnerable woman. Mr. Pierce. The deputy's voice was different now, smaller, careful. I think I need to have a conversation with Judge Creel before we go any further here. Carter turned on him. Holt? She's saying she didn't sign the paper, the deputy said. I'm not going to remove children from their mother on a paper she says she never signed. That's not something I'm willing to do. He looked at Liam, then at Eleanor. Ma'am, are you here of your own free will? Yes, she said. Are you being held here against your will? No. Are those children safe? Yes. He nodded. He looked back at Carter Pierce with the expression of a man who had come out here expecting a simple errand, and now understood he'd been used. He didn't like it. Liam could see that clearly.
"Mr. Pierce," the deputy said, "I think you need to speak to your lawyer before we proceed any further. I'm not taking action on this document today." Carter Pierce stood very still. Liam watched him. He'd seen men like Carter before. Men who never learned to lose gracefully because they'd never had to lose at all. He could see the calculation happening behind those easy eyes. He could see Carter deciding that this round was over and the next one was already being planned. "Of course," Carter said, and the smile came back, smooth and patient. "Of course. I understand. Eleanor." He looked at her, and his voice dropped to something that was built to sound intimate. "This isn't over." "No," she agreed. "It's not." He held her gaze for just a moment longer than he needed to. Then he turned his horse and rode, and the wide-shouldered man followed, and the deputy lingered just long enough to say, low and direct to Liam, "That paper doesn't look right to me. I'm sorry I came out here with it. I didn't know." "I know you didn't," Liam said. The deputy rode after them, and the yard was quiet again. Eleanor stood on the porch and watched the road until they disappeared. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her sides so they'd stop. "You did good," Liam said beside her. "I'm terrified," she said. "You didn't look it." "Good," she exhaled. "That's the point." By midday, word had gotten to town. It always did. A place like Harlow was small enough that 3 horses riding out to Morgan's land and coming back without what they'd gone for was a story that would be in 3 kitchens before noon. Liam went into town for supplies and came back with a look on his face that Eleanor had learned in the past week to read. Tight around the jaw, careful with his words. "People are talking," she said. It wasn't a question. "They are," he said. "About me." He set the supplies on the table. "There's a version of things going around. Carter's been busy. He told people you took the girls, that they're his daughters, that you ran off out of spite." Eleanor felt the anger move through her like a current. "Those are my daughters. He has no blood claim." "I know that," Liam said. "But he's been in this county for years, and you've been here 5 days. People believe what they already know." She sat down slowly. "So I'm already convicted." "Not by everyone." He turned around. "Doc Pruitt isn't buying it. And the deputy, Holt, he's not comfortable with any of this. I could see it. Those are 2 people on your side who matter." "And everyone else?" He was quiet for a moment, honest enough not to dress it up. "You're going to have to let them see you," he said. "Not hide out here like you're guilty of something. You need to be in town. People need to see a mother with her daughters, not a story Carter Pierce made up." Eleanor looked at her hands on the table. She had lived her whole life trying not to take up too much space, trying not to need too much, want too much, say too much. Carter had cultivated that in her, carefully and deliberately, because a woman who made herself small was easier to manage. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "I know," Liam said. He sat down across from her. "But scared and hiding looks a lot like guilty to people who don't know the difference." She looked up. "Come with me." He met her eyes. "If you want me there." "I want you there," she said. It was the most direct thing she'd asked for since she'd come. She saw him register that. He nodded once, businesslike, and stood up and went to check on the horses. But she caught the small shift in his expression before he turned away. Something that had been closed, just barely, easing open. They went into Harlow on Thursday. Eleanor wore her best remaining dress, the blue one, the one that hadn't been torn, and she carried Iris while Liam carried Rose, and they walked together down the main street in the full mid-morning heat. People looked. Of course they looked.
Eleanor kept her chin level and met every stare with a calm she was manufacturing one breath at a time. At the dry goods store, a woman named Mrs. Aldrin stepped deliberately into their path. She was the kind of woman who thought she was the center of a town's conscience. She looked at Eleanor with a particular mixture of pity and judgment that Eleanor recognized from every town she'd ever lived in. "So you're the one Carter Pierce has been looking for," Mrs. Aldrin said. Not to Liam, to Eleanor, cutting him out on purpose. "I'm Eleanor Gray," Eleanor said, "and these are my daughters, Rose and Iris." Mrs. Aldrin looked at the babies. Something flickered in her face. "He says they're his."
"He's wrong," Eleanor said. "He's wrong about a great many things."
"He's a well-respected man in this county." "Ma'am," Liam's voice was quiet and even and final. "This woman has been through enough. If you have questions, they can wait." Mrs. Aldrin looked at him sharply. She wasn't used to being cut off. But there was something in Liam Morgan's tone that discouraged argument. Not anger, just absolute certainty, the kind that cost a person something to push against. She stepped aside. They walked on. Eleanor kept her eyes forward and did not let herself look back. Liam said nothing. He didn't need to. The fact of him beside her, steady and unhurried, said everything that needed saying. At the end of the block, out of earshot, Eleanor said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Just keep walking." She almost smiled. She kept walking. She didn't see the man leaning against the post outside the saloon 3 doors back, watching them go. Didn't see him straighten up, unhurried, and pull out a pocket watch. Didn't see him look at the time the way a man does when he's been waiting for exactly the right moment and has just decided it's arrived. She was looking forward. That was the right instinct. She had just made the mistake of assuming the threat was behind her. It wasn't. Carter Pierce had men in this town she hadn't seen yet, and at least one of them had just sent word back to Millhaven that Eleanor Gray had made herself visible. By nightfall, Carter Pierce would know exactly where she was, exactly who was beside her, and exactly which angle to hit from next. The man outside the saloon was named Decker. Eleanor didn't know that yet. She wouldn't know it until it was almost too late. Liam found out that same evening, when Pete Harlow, who owned the feed store and had known Liam for 11 years, came by the farm just before supper and stood at the gate with his half in both hands and the look of a man delivering bad news he wished someone else had drawn the short straw on. "I don't want to stick my nose in," Pete said, "but I figured you'd want to know. There's a fella been in town since Tuesday. Decker, they're calling him. Works for Pierce. He's been asking questions. About you, about the woman, about your land. Who owns what? Whether there's any outstanding debt on the property. Whether the county assessor's records are up to date." Liam went still. Why would he care about the assessor's records? Pete looked at him steadily. Because if there's a discrepancy in the deed, anything at all, even a clerical error, a man with the right lawyer can tie up land ownership in court for 6 months. And if your land is in dispute, you lose standing. You can't serve as a character witness. You can't provide lawful residence to anyone. He paused. It's not about the woman, Liam, or not just about her. Pierce is going after the ground under your feet. Liam stood at the gate for a long moment after Pete left. The summer evening was cooling, just slightly, and somewhere behind the barn a meadowlark was singing like the world was perfectly fine. He went inside and told Eleanor. She sat very still while he talked. She had both babies asleep in the back room, and her hands were wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold, and she sat still, the way people sit still when they're using all their available energy not to come apart. "He did this before," she said when Liam finished. "In Grover City. There was a man there, a preacher, who tried to help me. Carter found a tax dispute on his church property. 3 weeks later, the preacher was too busy fighting to keep his building to spend any time on my situation. She looked up. Carter doesn't fight people. He fights the ground they're standing on. Then we make sure the ground is solid, Liam said. How? I ride to the county seat tomorrow, get a certified copy of my deed, get it verified and witnessed, and filed again fresh, so there is no question and no gap anyone can push a lawsuit through. He sat down across from her. But Eleanor, I need to know something first. She met his eyes. Is there anything else? He said. Anything he has on you that I don't know about? Anything that would look bad if it came out in front of a judge? I need to know all of it, now, not in a courtroom. She held his gaze. He watched her decide whether to trust him, watched the whole calculation move across her face. And he didn't rush it, didn't push, just waited, the way he'd learned to wait for things that mattered. The girl's father, she said. Carter isn't their father. He knows that. We were engaged, but we were never married, and Rose and Iris were born before any of that, from a man who died before he could know about them. Carter knows they aren't his. He doesn't care. He wants them because they're leverage. As long as he has them, he has me. And as long as he has me... She stopped. I managed a great deal of his business accounts. I kept records that he would rather not exist. Liam was quiet for a moment. What kind of records? The kind that would interest a federal land commissioner, she said. Carter has been selling parcels of territory that he doesn't legally own. Government land, mostly. He has a man in the land office who adjusts the surveys. He's been doing it for 4 years. She reached into the front of her dress and produced a small folded envelope, worn at the creases from being carried close. I copied 12 transactions before I left. Names, dates, amounts, parcel numbers. It's not everything, but it's enough. Liam looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. Eleanor, he said carefully, that document is the reason he wants you back. Not the girls, not you. That. I know, she said. He won't stop. I know that too. Why didn't you use it? Go to the land commissioner directly. Because I was alone with 2 newborn babies and a knife wound, she said, and her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. Because I didn't know who else he'd paid off. Because I was running and I barely had enough strength to keep running, let alone walk into a government office and hand over evidence against a man with lawyers in 3 counties. She exhaled. I was waiting until I found somewhere safe enough to breathe. Liam looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over hers, just for a second, brief, careful, not asking anything. You found it, he said. She looked down at his hand and then back up at him, and she didn't say anything, because she was afraid that if she opened her mouth right then, she would cry. And she had not cried once since the night she ran. And she was not going to start now. He left for the county seat at first light. Eleanor watched him ride out and spent the morning doing ordinary things with extraordinary attention. Feeding the girls, washing linens, sweeping the porch. All the small, ordinary acts of a life being rebuilt from scratch. Each one an act of quiet defiance against everything Carter Pierce wanted for her. She was hanging the wash when Doc Pruitt drove up. He climbed down from his buggy with the deliberate care of a man who had learned to save his energy. And he came to the fence and looked at her with those careful eyes over his spectacles. You look better, he said. I feel better, she said. Liam went to the county seat. I know. That's why I came now. He glanced toward the road, then back at her. I want to talk to you without him getting protective and making it harder than it needs to be. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope, thicker than hers, official-looking. "I called in a favor. Old friend in Millhaven, man named Judge Beaumont. Not Creel, Beaumont. He's the other judge, the one Carter Pierce has not managed to buy." Eleanor set down the washing and came to the fence. "What is this?" she said. "An emergency petition," Pruitt said, "challenging the legitimacy of Creel's guardianship order on the grounds that the mother's consent was not obtained and the document may have been fraudulently witnessed. It doesn't overturn it today, but it puts a hold on it. Pierce can't act on that paper until Beaumont's reviewed it, and Beaumont owes me enough to review it quickly." He looked at her over his glasses. "I need your written account. What happened the night the paper was supposedly signed? Where you were, what condition you were in, why your signature doesn't appear." Eleanor's throat was tight. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I've been a doctor in this county for 31 years, Pruitt said. "And I've seen what men like Pierce do to women who don't have anyone in their corner. And I'm old enough that the consequences don't much frighten me anymore." He held out a pen. "Write it down, Eleanor. Every detail you can remember. Don't soften it." She took the pen. Her hand was shaking slightly. She steadied it. She wrote for 40 minutes at the kitchen table, while Pruitt sat on the porch and drank the coffee she'd left on the stove. She wrote it all. The night, the men, the pain, the paper pushed in front of her face while the room was still tilting. Carter's voice telling her to stop making it difficult. She wrote it in plain language, without decoration, because the truth didn't need any. When she brought the pages out, Pruitt read them without expression, and then looked up at her. "You're sure about all of this?" "Every word," she said. He folded the pages into the envelope and tucked it into his coat. He climbed back up onto his buggy. He looked at her from his seat with that steady, spectacled gaze. "Beaumont will have this by tomorrow," he said. "After that—" He shrugged one thin shoulder. "We'll see. Pierce has a long reach, but reach has limits, even his." He drove away, and Eleanor stood at the fence and watched him go. And she thought about all the people who had appeared in this week with their small acts of help. Pete Harlow with his warning, the deputy with his unease, Pruitt with his petition. And she thought that she had spent so long learning to expect the worst from people that she'd nearly forgotten some of them were capable of the opposite. She was still standing there when she heard Iris begin to cry from inside the house. And she turned and went in, back to the work of the day, back to the ordinary, extraordinary labor of keeping two small lives fed and warm and whole. Liam was back by late afternoon with the certified deed and a look on his face that Eleanor had not seen before. Something taut, restrained, like a man keeping something inside until he decided what to do with it. She waited until he'd put up the horse and come inside, and sat down before she asked, "What happened?" He put a paper on the table. Not the deed, a different paper. "The county clerk showed me this," he said. "Filed 2 days ago. Carter Pierce has petitioned the court for an injunction. He's claiming that you are mentally unfit to care for the children, and that your association with me represents a danger to their welfare." He paused. "He's named me specifically. Says I have a history of instability since Sarah's death." Eleanor stared at the paper. "He's calling you unstable." "He's had people talking to people." His jaw was tight. "Nothing happened to me after Sarah. I grieved. I kept to myself. But a man who keeps to himself can be painted any way somebody wants to paint him, if nobody's watching closely." "He's trying to discredit you," she said. "Take away your testimony before you can give it." "That's what I figure." He looked at her steadily. "Eleanor, this is going to go to a hearing. There's no avoiding it now. Beaumont's petition. Pruitt told me about it when I stopped to water the horse. That's good. That buys us time. But eventually, we stand in front of a judge, and we tell the truth, and we let him decide. A beat. Are you ready for that? She looked at him. The light was slanting low through the kitchen, and everything looked very clean and simple. And she thought about all the times she had waited for someone else to decide what happened next in her life. I've been ready, she said. I just needed somewhere safe enough to stand. He held her gaze, and something in him settled, some last piece of doubt going quiet. And he nodded. The hearing was set for the following Wednesday, 4 days away. Eleanor counted them the way you count days when each one feels like a gamble. On Monday, Carter Pierce made his third move. She was in the yard with Iris when the woman appeared at the gate. Not a man this time. Carter had understood, apparently, that men at Eleanor's fence were not working in his favor. This was a woman in her 40s, well-dressed, with a kind of face that had learned to look sympathetic without actually committing to any feeling. Miss Gray, the woman said, my name is Vera Whitmore. I represent the Millhaven County Children's Welfare Association. She produced a card. We've received a report of concern regarding the welfare of 2 infant girls in your care. I'm here to conduct an assessment. Eleanor looked at the card. Then she looked at the woman. Who filed the report? She said. Reports are confidential, Vera said pleasantly. Who sent you? Eleanor said. Vera's pleasant look held, but her eyes shifted just slightly. As I said, I know who sent you, Eleanor said, and I know what you're here to see. You're welcome to come in and see my daughters and the house they're living in. But I want you to understand something before you do. She stepped back from the gate and held it open. Whatever you write in your report, it needs to reflect what you actually see, not what you were told to see. Because I have a document being reviewed by Judge Beaumont right now. And when this is over and everything comes out, people are going to read very carefully what anyone connected to Carter Pierce said or did in these 4 days. Vera Whitmore went very still. And I will remember your name, Eleanor said. Not threatening, just certain. The woman came in. She walked through the house. She looked at the girls, healthy, clean, fed, sleeping in the soft afternoon light. She looked at the kitchen, the hearth, the small, careful order of a home being run by a woman who knew what she was doing. She wrote things in a small notebook, and she said very little. At the door, she paused. Miss Gray, she said, and her voice was different now, quieter. For what it's worth, I didn't know about a court petition when I was asked to come out here. I was told this was a routine welfare check. She tucked her notebook away. I'm going to write what I saw. That's all I'm asking, Eleanor said. Vera left. Eleanor watched her go and then closed the door and leaned against it and let herself shake for a full 30 seconds before she straightened up and went to check on the girls. She was still standing over their cot, watching their faces, when she heard hoofbeats. Again. Her whole body tensed. But it was only Pete Harlow, and with him, unexpectedly, was the young deputy, Holt, and a man she didn't recognize. Older, wearing a dark coat and a serious expression that said official without needing a badge. She went to the door. Holt looked at her from his horse. Miss Gray, this is Mr. Greer. He's an investigator from the Federal Land Commissioner's office. He says he's been looking into Carter Pierce for some time. He paused. And he says he was told you might have documents that would help him. Eleanor went very still. She looked at the man in the dark coat. He looked back at her. Calm, patient. The look of a man who had learned to wait without giving anything away. Who told you that? She said. A doctor named Pruitt, Greer said. He was persuasive. Eleanor put her hand on the doorframe to steady herself. She thought about the small folded envelope she'd been carrying against her skin for 6 months. Through fear and flight and a knife wound and 2 weeks in a stranger's house.
She thought about 12 transactions and the names of the men who had signed them. She thought about Carter Pierce, standing at the gate with his easy smile and his certainty that she had nowhere left to go. "Come in," she said. "I'll put on coffee." She stepped back from the door, and for the first time in 6 months, Eleanor Gray felt the weight she had been carrying shift. Not lift entirely, not yet, but shift. Like something that had been pressing down on her chest for so long, she'd forgotten what breathing without it felt like. The hearing was Wednesday. Carter Pierce was going to walk into that courtroom believing he already knew the outcome. He had spent 6 months making sure of it, buying judges, paying lawyers, sending men to stand at gates and women to walk through houses, and clerks to file papers designed to take the ground out from under the people standing in his way. He had not planned for Eleanor Gray to still be standing. He had not planned for a man like Liam Morgan to be standing beside her. And he had not planned, not for 1 second, for the envelope she pulled from inside her dress and set on the kitchen table in front of the federal investigator, steady-handed and clear-eyed, while the coffee came to a boil on the stove. Greer spent 2 hours at the kitchen table. He read every page of Eleanor's documents twice, asked precise questions in a low, unhurried voice, and wrote things in a leather notebook with the focused efficiency of a man who had been building a case for a long time and had just been handed the piece he'd been missing. When he was done, he closed the notebook and looked at Eleanor directly. "These 12 transactions," he said. "You copied these yourself?" "From Carter's private ledger," she said. "He kept it in the bottom drawer of his desk. He didn't know I'd seen it. He didn't think I was paying attention." "And you can testify to where and when you copied them?" "Yes." "And the man in the land office, Sellers, you saw his name in these records personally?" "I wrote down what I saw," she said. "Every word in that envelope is accurate." Greer looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Miss Gray, do you understand that testifying to this in court will put you in a direct line of legal retaliation from Carter Pierce and at least 3 other men who have reason to want these records buried?" Eleanor looked at him steadily. "Mr. Greer, Carter Pierce sent a man to put a knife in me while I was holding my daughters. I understand the risk." Greer nodded, once, the nod of a man marking something down in a private internal ledger. "All right," he said. He stood, tucked the notebook away, and buttoned his coat. "I won't be at the hearing Wednesday. My presence would complicate things, and Carter would know we're further along than we are. But after the hearing," he looked at her, "whatever happens Wednesday, you come to me. Don't wait. Don't negotiate with him. Don't accept any agreement he offers, no matter how reasonable it sounds. Come straight to me." "And if Wednesday doesn't go our way?" she said. "Then I'll be moving faster than he expects," Greer said. "He's been careful for 4 years. Men who are careful for a long time tend to get confident. Confident men make mistakes." He picked up his hat. "You've already given me enough to start. Wednesday is one battle. What comes after is the war." He left with Holt, and the house was quiet again. And Eleanor sat at the table with her hands flat on the wood and breathed until her heart rate came down to something manageable. Liam came in from the barn where he'd stayed deliberately out of Greer's way, giving her the room to handle it herself. He looked at her face and read it the way he'd learned to read her in 2 weeks, quickly and without needing many details. "Well," he said. "He thinks the documents are enough," she said. "For the federal case anyway." "And Wednesday?" She looked up. "Wednesday is still Wednesday.
He sat down across from her. He put both hands on the table and looked at her with that steady, dark-eyed calm that she'd come to understand was not the absence of feeling, but the deliberate management of it. "I'll be there," he said, "right beside you." She almost told him it wasn't his fight. The words formed in her throat the way they always did. The old reflex, the trained instinct to make herself smaller, to need less, to insist she could manage alone. She had spent years perfecting that particular brand of pride. She let it go. "I know," she said. "Thank you." He didn't make anything of it. He just nodded and got up to start supper. And Eleanor sat at the table and watched him move around the kitchen with the quiet competence of a man who had learned to do everything alone. And she thought that was the saddest and most recognizable thing she had ever seen. Tuesday came and nearly broke everything. She was nursing Iris in the front room when she heard the wagon on the road. Not hoofbeats this time. A wagon, slow and deliberate. And then the sound of it stopping at the gate. She put Iris down gently and went to the window. Two men in the wagon she didn't know. But between them, with her hands folded in her lap, and her face arranged in the particular expression of a woman who believed she was doing the right thing, sat Eleanor's mother. Eleanor's entire body went cold. Her mother, Margaret Gray, 61 years old, Presbyterian, unshakable in her convictions, had not spoken to Eleanor in 9 months. Not since Eleanor had refused to go back to Carter. Not since Margaret had said, in her carefully modulated voice, that Eleanor was throwing away a good man and a secure life because of what she called a feeling, and that feelings were not a sufficient reason to ruin one's future. Eleanor had not answered that letter. She had not answered the two that came after it. And now, Margaret Gray was at the gate. Liam came in from the back and looked at Eleanor's face. "What is it?" "My mother," Eleanor said. The words came out flat. He looked out the window, looked back at her. "Do you want to see her?" Eleanor had about 30 seconds to decide. She could say no. She could stay inside and wait until the wagon left. She could protect herself from whatever Carter Pierce had told her mother. Whatever version of events had made Margaret Gray climb into a wagon with 2 of Carter's men and ride out to Liam Morgan's farm. She went to the door. Her mother's face when she saw Eleanor. There was one unguarded second, just one, when relief crossed it so completely it almost looked like love. Then the composure came back, and Margaret Gray was herself again, straight-backed and certain. "Eleanor," she said. "Mama," Eleanor said, "come in." She did not invite the 2 men. She held the gate just wide enough for her mother and then closed it again, and she felt both men's eyes on her back as she walked her mother inside. Liam made himself scarce with a quiet tact that Eleanor had begun to expect from him. The back door closed. The house felt very still. Margaret sat at the kitchen table and looked at Eleanor across it. And Eleanor looked back and waited. "He came to see me," Margaret said. "Carter. He was very upset, Eleanor. He said you took the children and left without a word, and that he's been half out of his mind." "Did he show you a scar?" Eleanor said. Her mother blinked. "What? Did he show you anything that looked like damage? Anything that suggested a man who had been hurt?" She kept her voice even. "Or did he come to your house looking exactly the way he always looks? Pressed, composed, very sad, very reasonable." A pause. A small one. "He was worried about you," Margaret said, but her voice had shifted slightly. "Mama." Eleanor pulled down the collar of her dress, just enough to show the edge of the wound on her side. Healed now, but still dark and deliberate in its line. "His man did that, while I was holding Rose and Iris, as he put it, a demonstration." Margaret Gray stared at the scar. Her face went through several things in rapid succession that Eleanor couldn't fully name. Then she looked up, and Eleanor watched her mother do what Margaret Gray had always done: push the difficult thing aside and reach for the version of events that required the least amount of her to be wrong. "Men sometimes," she started. "Don't," Eleanor said. "Please don't." Silence. "He told me you have documents," Margaret said carefully. "He said you took something that belongs to him, and that if you just return it, all of this would go away. The court case, everything. He said he just wants to put it behind them and start fresh." Eleanor looked at her mother for a long moment. The anger was there. It was always there when it came to this particular conversation, this particular pattern. But underneath it was something older and more tired. The grief of a daughter who had needed her mother to see clearly and been disappointed too many times. "He wants those documents because they prove he's been committing federal fraud for 4 years, Eleanor said. "If I give them back, they disappear, and so do I. That's what start fresh means, Mama. That's what it has always meant." Margaret was quiet. Her hands were flat on the table. "He could give you a good life," she said, and her voice was very small. "He already gave me this one," Eleanor said. She touched her side. The silence that followed was the longest one they had ever sat inside together. Eleanor watched her mother's face, and she thought about all the years of wanting Margaret to simply choose her, just once, without conditions or caveats, or the careful balancing of what was practical against what was right. Margaret looked at the door to the back room, where Rose and Iris were sleeping. She looked at it for a long time. "Are they healthy?" she said quietly. "They're perfect," Eleanor said. Her mother nodded, very small. She stood. She did not apologize. Eleanor had not expected that, had stopped expecting it years ago. But at the door, she stopped with her back still to Eleanor, and she said, "Those men outside came with me. I didn't know they were his." A pause. "I won't tell him anything about what I saw here." It wasn't much. Eleanor knew it wasn't much. "Thank you, Mama," she said. Her mother walked out to the wagon. Eleanor stood at the door and watched her go, and did not cry, though the pressure behind her eyes was enormous. She had learned, somewhere along the way, to save her tears for things that still had the possibility of changing. Her mother was not one of those things. She had come to a kind of peace with that, slow and painful, the way you come to peace with any loss that happens in increments over years. Liam appeared beside her at the door. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. After a moment, Eleanor said, "She won't help him. That's the best I can hope for." "That's something," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." Wednesday arrived the way difficult days always do. Ordinary in its light, indifferent to what was required of the people living inside it. They arrived at the courthouse early. Liam had put on his good shirt, and Eleanor wore the blue dress again, Iris strapped against her chest, and Rose in Liam's arms, which had surprised her until she saw how naturally he held the child and understood that he had wanted to, that carrying Rose into that courtroom was his own quiet declaration of something. The courthouse in Harlow was one room with wooden benches and tall windows, and a smell of old paper and linseed oil. By the time Eleanor and Liam came in, it was already half full. Pete Harlow was there. Doc Pruitt was there, straight-backed in the front row. Deputy Holt was there, in his official capacity, standing to one side with a face that was working hard at neutrality. And Carter Pierce was there, in a dark suit, perfectly fitted, with his lawyer, a man named Graves, sharp-featured and expensive, beside him. He looked at Eleanor when she came in, and he gave her that smile, the one she'd spent months learning to read, and what it said today was, "I have already won this. We both know it. The question is only how long you want to make this painful." She looked away from him and sat down next to Liam and fixed her eyes on the judge's bench. Judge Beaumont was not what she'd expected. She had expected someone like Creel, polished, comfortable, the kind of man who moved through official spaces with the ease of someone who knew every hidden door. Beaumont was older, with a face like weathered fencewood, and he moved without hurry and looked at the room when he sat down, with the particular steady gaze of a man who had heard a great many lies in his time and had developed an accurate nose for them. He read through the documents for 6 full minutes without speaking. Both lawyers sat with their hands on their tables. Carter Pierce sat perfectly still. Eleanor focused on breathing. Then Beaumont looked up. "Mr. Graves," he said, "your client's petition for guardianship is premised on this document." He held up Creel's order. "I have before me a signed statement from the mother of these children, asserting that she was not conscious when this document was witnessed, and that her signature does not appear on it. How does your client respond?" Graves rose smoothly. "Your Honor, the mother's account is that of a woman who, at the time, was experiencing significant mental distress following a difficult birth. Her recollection of events, her signature doesn't appear on the document," Beaumont said. Not loudly, just with complete finality, the way a door closes. "That's not a question of recollection. That's a question of ink on paper. Can you point me to her signature?" A pause. Brief, but it was there. The witnessing parties attested. "Can you point me to her signature, Mr. Graves?" Another pause, shorter. "No, Your Honor." The room was very quiet. "Miss Gray," Beaumont said, and Eleanor stood. "This court wants to hear from you directly, in your own words, why you left, what you are asking for, and what you believe the best interest of your daughters to be." She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed it in the kitchen the night before while the girls slept, and Liam sat across from her and listened to her practice until her voice stopped shaking. But standing up in that room with Carter Pierce 15 feet to her left and 24 pairs of eyes on her face, she forgot every prepared word. She said what was true instead. She said she had left because she was afraid for her life and her daughters' lives, and that her fear had been justified by what happened before she ran. She said the girls had been born before her engagement to Carter Pierce, and that he had no biological connection to them, and no legal claim she had ever agreed to. She said she had spent the last 2 weeks being threatened, having men sent to her gate, having her character questioned by people paid to question it, and having her mother brought in as an instrument of pressure. She said she was asking the court for one thing, for the fraudulent guardianship order to be set aside so that she could raise her daughters in peace. She sat down. Her hands were shaking. She put them flat on her knees where nobody could see. Then Carter's lawyer called Carter to speak. Carter Pierce stood and turned his considerable gift for performance on Judge Beaumont, and Eleanor had to admit that he was extraordinary at it. His voice carried just the right amount of controlled grief. He spoke about his concern for the children's welfare, about Eleanor's state of mind, about the instability of her living situation. He said Liam Morgan's name with precisely calibrated doubt, allowing the jury of public opinion in the room to draw their own unflattering conclusions without his having to say anything directly actionable. Liam sat beside Eleanor and did not move and did not react, and Eleanor understood that this was its own kind of courage. Then Beaumont said, "Mr. Morgan." Liam stood. "You have been housing Miss Gray and her daughters for approximately 2 weeks," Beaumont said. "Tell me about that situation." Liam was quiet for a moment, choosing his words the way he always did. "She needed help," he said. She was hurt and alone with 2 newborn babies. I had the space. There's not much more to it than that. You have no personal interest in this case. No romantic claim on Miss Gray. I have an interest in what's right, Liam said.
If that counts as personal, then yes. Someone in the back of the room made a small sound. Beaumont's expression didn't change, but something in it settled slightly. And these children, Beaumont said, in your observation, are they being well cared for? Better than well, Liam said. Their mother hasn't put them down unless she had to. Beaumont nodded and looked at his papers. Carter's lawyer rose immediately. You're absolutely not, Your Honor. Are you aware of any person who may have done so? No, Your Honor. Beaumont looked at him for a long moment. All right, he said. He looked down at his papers. The room held its breath. Then the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and everyone turned, because doors don't open at moments like this without meaning something. Deputy Holt walked in. Beside him was a man in a dark coat. Greer. Eleanor's heart stopped. Greer walked to the front of the room and handed Beaumont a folded document without looking at Carter Pierce once. Carter looked at it. Just for 1 second, one crack in the plaster. She saw something move across his face that she had never seen there before. Fear. Beaumont read the document. He read it twice. His expression remained exactly as it had been, weathered and steady. But when he set it down, there was a quality of finality in the gesture. This court is recessing for 30 minutes, he said. Mr. Graves, I suggest you use that time to speak with your client about his current federal exposure. He looked at Carter Pierce directly. Mr. Pierce, you will remain in this building. He stood, and the room stood with him, and Carter Pierce sat perfectly still in his chair while everyone around him rose. And Eleanor watched him and saw the exact moment a man realizes that the outcome he was certain of has just become something else entirely. She looked at Liam. He was looking at her. What just happened? She said quietly. I think, he said just as quietly, that Greer moved faster than anyone expected. Eleanor looked at Greer, who had taken a position against the wall and was looking at his own shoes with the expression of a man who had done precisely what he came to do and was now simply waiting for the machinery to turn. She looked at Carter Pierce, who was leaning toward his lawyer with his face turned away from the room, and she watched the lawyer's face go from confidence to calculation to something that looked very much like the early stages of a man who was reconsidering his client's ability to pay his fees. She looked at Rose and Iris, both asleep in her arms and Liam's, oblivious, perfect, breathing slow. 30 minutes, and then she would walk back into that room and hear what came next. She had run for 6 months with nothing but these 2 small lives and a handful of copied documents, and the stubborn, battered conviction that she had the right to exist on her own terms. She had found a man who believed the same thing about her before she believed it about herself. She had found a doctor and a deputy and a federal investigator and a feed store owner who had each decided, independently and without coordination, that her truth was worth standing up for. Carter Pierce had planned for everything. He had not planned for this. The 30 minutes felt like a year. Eleanor sat on the hard wooden bench in the hallway outside the courtroom with Iris in her arms, and Rose asleep against Liam's shoulder. And she listened to the muffled sounds of urgent conversation coming through the door. Graves' careful lawyer voice, Carter's lower, tighter responses. And she counted her own heartbeats to keep herself from coming apart. Doc Pruitt sat 2 feet away with his hat on his knee. Pete Harlow stood against the opposite wall. Deputy Holt had positioned himself near the courtroom door with the careful neutrality of a man who was paid to be impartial and was finding it increasingly difficult. Greer stood slightly apart from everyone,
reading something in his notebook, utterly composed. Eleanor looked at him. "What did you give Beaumont?" Greer looked up. "A federal warrant," he said, "signed this morning, for Carter Pierce and a man named Sellers in the land office. He said it the way other men might report the weather. We've been building toward it for 8 months. Your documents gave us the last piece." 8 months, Eleanor said. "He's been careful. As I said, careful men get confident. Confident men stop checking behind them." He looked back at his notebook. He stopped checking. "What happens to him?" she said. "Federal fraud, falsification of land surveys, bribery of a government official." Greer closed the notebook. "If Graves is doing his job in there, he's telling Carter right now that the smartest thing he can do today is not make anything worse. A man facing federal charges who also has a pending civil matter involving fraudulent court documents and assault." He paused. "Judges don't look kindly on that combination." Eleanor looked at the closed door. "He could still fight the custody case." "He could," Greer said, "but a man under federal warrant fighting a custody case in front of Beaumont is not a man in a strong position, and Carter Pierce understands positions." He met her eyes. "He'll calculate." Liam said nothing. He'd said very little since they'd come out here. He was looking at Rose's face with that careful, quiet attention he gave to things that mattered to him, and Eleanor watched him do it and felt something move through her that she did not have a word for yet, but recognized as something she wanted to keep feeling. Then the courtroom door opened, and Graves stepped out. He looked at Eleanor with the particular expression of a lawyer who has just been through an unpleasant conversation and has arrived at an outcome he intends to present as reasonable. "Miss Gray," he said, "my client would like to discuss a resolution." Eleanor looked at Greer. Greer gave the smallest possible shake of his head. She looked back at Graves. "Tell your client I'll hear what Judge Beaumont decides." Graves's expression tightened. "Miss Gray, a negotiated resolution would be in everyone's—" "Tell your client," she said again, steady and final, "that I will hear what Judge Beaumont decides." Graves went back inside. The door closed. Liam looked at her sidelong. "That was well done," he said quietly. "Greer told me not to negotiate," she said. "You didn't need Greer to tell you that," he said. "You already knew." She looked at him. He was right. She had known. The knowledge had been sitting in her chest, solid and certain, from the moment Graves opened his mouth. 6 months ago, she would have bargained. 6 months ago, she would have taken whatever was offered and called it relief. Something had shifted in her since the wagon, since the kitchen table, since the porch and the deputy and the doctor, and the 38 minutes she'd spent standing in front of Judge Beaumont, telling the plain truth. She had stopped negotiating with people who had no right to make demands of her. "Liam," she said. "Yeah?" "Whatever happens in there, I need you to know that you gave me something I didn't have when I came here." She kept her eyes forward, on the closed door. "I don't mean the house, or the food, or the doctor. I mean, you treated the truth of what I said like it mattered. Before there was a federal investigator, or a petition, or any of it. You just took my word and stood on it." She paused. Nobody had done that in a long time. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "Somebody should have done it a long time ago," he said. "I'm sorry they didn't." She nodded. That was all. It was enough. The door opened and the bailiff called them back in. Carter Pierce was already seated when they returned, and Eleanor looked at him the moment she came through the door, because she had learned that the first unguarded second was the one that told you everything. He looked composed. He looked exactly as he always looked. Straight in his chair, hands easy on the table, jaw set at the precise angle of a man accustomed to controlling rooms. But his eyes were different. Something had gone out of them. The certainty, the settled knowledge that he was managing a situation he already owned. It had been replaced by something flatter, more careful. The look of a man who was doing arithmetic and not liking the totals. Beaumont came back in, and the room rose and sat, and Beaumont looked at his papers for a long moment before he looked up. "I've reviewed the federal document presented by Mr. Gray," he said.
"I want to be clear that this court's decision today is made on the civil matter before it, and not on any federal proceeding, which is a separate jurisdiction. However," he paused, "the federal document does speak to the credibility of certain claims made in this hearing, and this court is not obligated to ignore it." Graves shifted in his seat. "The guardianship order issued by Judge Creel," Beaumont said, "is set aside, effective immediately. The document is fraudulent on its face. The mother's consent was neither sought nor obtained, and the witnessing of the document under the circumstances described in Miss Gray's sworn account does not meet the legal standard required." He looked at Eleanor. "Your daughters are yours, Miss Gray. They were always yours. This court is simply stating what the law already said." The room exhaled. Pete Harlow made a quiet sound in the back. Pruitt's shoulders dropped by a fraction. Eleanor did not move.
She held Iris against her chest, and she felt Rose being placed gently in the crook of her other arm by Liam, and she held both her daughters, and she breathed, and she did not look at Carter Pierce. "Furthermore," Beaumont said, "in light of the information before this court, I am referring the matter of the fraudulent witnessing to the county prosecutor's office for investigation, and I am issuing a restraining order preventing Carter Pierce from approaching within 300 yards of Eleanor Gray, her daughters, or the Morgan property." He looked at Pierce directly. "Mr. Pierce, you are advised by this court to direct your full attention to your federal situation and to consider very carefully any further action in this jurisdiction." Carter looked at Beaumont. He said nothing. "You're free to go, Miss Gray," Beaumont said. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down, and the room moved around Eleanor like water, and she sat perfectly still in the middle of it, holding her daughters, until Liam's hand came to rest on her shoulder, light, steady, asking nothing. "Let's go home," he said. She stood. She walked out. She did not look back at Carter Pierce, and she did not look back at the courtroom, and she did not stop until she was outside in the full summer heat, with the sky enormous and blue above her, and her daughters breathing against her chest. Then she stopped. She tipped her head back. She closed her eyes. She had not felt the sun on her face like that in 6 months, without the cold underneath it, the waiting, the constant peripheral awareness of threat. It felt different. It felt like something she was allowed to have. Carter Pierce was arrested on the steps of the hotel in Millhaven 3 days later. Greer's men were efficient and unhurried about it. By the time the news reached Harlow, Sellers in the land office had already surrendered to federal custody and was talking in exchange for leniency. Judge Creel had retained a lawyer of his own. Carter had calculated, just as Greer said he would. He had decided to fight the federal charges and abandon the civil situation entirely, which was the rational choice from where he stood. He left Harlow County without sending a message or making a final gesture, and Eleanor understood that this too was calculated, that a man like Carter always knew when the performance had run its course. She was hanging wash in the yard when Pete Harlow rode by and called out the news, and she stood there with the sheet half hung, and she thought she would feel something enormous. Relief like a wave, maybe. Or joy.
or the particular lightness of a danger finally removed. What she felt instead was quieter than that. Simpler. Like a door closing softly in a room she had been afraid to leave. She finished hanging the wash. Inside, Liam was at the kitchen table going over his accounts. Rose asleep in the wooden cradle he'd built 3 days after the hearing without being asked. Iris in the sling Eleanor had fashioned from a flour sack. He looked up when she came in. "They arrested him," she said. He put down his pen. "You all right?" She thought about it honestly, which was something she'd started doing, being honest with herself instead of managing herself. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." He nodded. He looked at her for a moment with that direct, careful look of his, and then he said, "Sit down, Eleanor. I want to ask you something." She sat down across from him, and she watched his face move through the particular process she'd come to recognize as Liam choosing words like he was choosing tools, deliberately, for fit and function. "I know you've been thinking about what comes next," he said. "Where you go, what you do. You haven't said it, but I can see you thinking about it." He looked at his hands on the table. "I want to say something, and I want you to hear it without feeling obligated by it. Can you do that?" "I can try," she said. He looked up. "Don't go," he said. "Not because you owe me anything. Not because you don't have somewhere else to be. But because I think you know as well as I do that what's been happening in this house these past 3 weeks isn't just courtesy, isn't just one stranger helping another." He stopped. "I'm not good at this. I haven't done it in a long time. But I know that when you're here, this house is different than it was. And I know that Rose and Iris..." His voice dropped slightly. "I know that I would miss them. And I know I would miss you." Eleanor looked at him across the table. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head a dozen times, in the middle of the night, in the quiet moments between feeding and sleeping, in all the spaces where her mind ran ahead of her body. She had told herself she would be careful. She had told herself she would be rational and measured and slow, because she had learned, at considerable cost, what happened when you trusted the wrong person quickly. She looked at Liam Morgan, 41 years old, weathered and quiet, a man who had held her daughters without being asked, and stood in front of a powerful man with nothing but the truth, and held his ground there, too. A man who had not once, in 3 weeks, made her feel like she owed him the particular debt that men sometimes extracted from women in exchange for help. She thought about Rose's name and Iris's name, things that keep coming back, even after a hard winter. She thought about a cabin that had been a place of grief and was becoming something else.
"I'm not good at it either," she said. "I've made serious mistakes about who to trust."
"So have I," he said. "I have 2 daughters and a federal prosecutor who may need my testimony for the next year." "I have a farm that needs more hands than one." She almost smiled. "That's very practical." "I'm a practical man." "Liam," she said his name the way she'd been careful not to say it, directly, without the careful distance she'd maintained. "If I stay, it can't be because I have nowhere else to go. I need it to be a choice I'm making, not a situation I'm accepting." "I know that," he said. "I wouldn't want it any other way." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then I choose to stay," she said. "For now. And we see." Something moved across his face. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something quieter and more careful than either. He nodded. "For now," he agreed. "And we see." Rose made a small sound from the cradle, the particular sound that meant she was waking up and had opinions about it. Eleanor rose and went to her automatically, and she picked up her daughter and stood in Liam Morgan's kitchen, with the summer afternoon coming through the window, and both her girls alive and whole. And she thought that this exact moment, was what she had been running toward all along, without knowing what she was running toward.
10. 6 weeks later, Doc Pruitt stopped by on a Tuesday for no stated reason and stayed for coffee and ended up staying for supper. And he sat on the porch afterward with Liam while Eleanor put the girls down. And he said, in the particular tone of a man making an observation rather than a point, "You look different than you did 2 months ago." Liam said, "I feel different." "Different how?" Liam was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Like I remembered why I built this place," he said. "It wasn't to be alone in it." Pruitt looked out at the yard. "No," he said. "I reckon it wasn't."
Eleanor came out and settled in the chair beside Liam's, and Iris was still awake and making interested sounds at the evening, and Eleanor held her up and let her look at the sky the way she liked to, and Liam reached over without thinking and straightened Iris's small blanket, and Eleanor looked at his hand on the blanket and then looked up at him, and something passed between them. Quiet, solid, the kind of thing that doesn't require words, because it's already been decided by the accumulation of all the small moments leading to it. Pruitt finished his coffee and said his goodnights and drove away. And the yard was quiet, and the summer evening was doing what summer evenings do, slowing down, going gold, taking its time about becoming something else. "Pete asked me this morning if we were—" Liam started. "I heard," Eleanor said. "What did you tell him?" She looked at Iris, who had grabbed one of her fingers and was holding it with that absolute, uncomplicated grip of a baby who does not know yet that the world is complicated. "I told him we were figuring it out," she said. "He seemed to think that was sufficient." "Pete's a wise man," Liam said. "He is." She looked up. The sky was going pink and enormous above the flat land and the dry grass, and she thought about everything that had brought her here. The running, the fear, the knife, the wagon, the 2 weeks of learning to trust a man who had given her no reason not to. She thought about Carter Pierce in a federal holding cell, doing the arithmetic of his choices. And she thought about Rose and Iris, asleep inside, with names she'd given them because she believed in things that kept coming back. She had come to Liam Morgan's land with nothing but 2 daughters, a wound, and a handful of stolen documents. She had arrived with her life in pieces, and her trust worn down to almost nothing, and the deep, exhausted certainty that she was going to have to do all of it alone. She had been wrong about that last part. Some things, it turned out, came back even after the hardest winter. Some things found you in unlikely places, and proved themselves, not through grand gestures, but through the daily, unglamorous, quietly extraordinary work of showing up and staying. Eleanor Gray had spent 6 months learning to run. She had spent the last 6 weeks learning something harder, something that required more courage than running ever had. She had learned to stay. She had learned to trust the ground under her feet. She had learned to look at a man who held her daughters like they were already his, and let herself believe, slowly and carefully, and with her eyes open, that some things were exactly what they appeared to be. The evening settled around them, warm and still. Inside, Rose was sleeping. Iris had let go of Eleanor's finger and was blinking at the last light with the expression of a person encountering something wonderful for the first time. Liam Morgan sat beside Eleanor Gray on his porch in the long summer evening, and the farm that had been a place of grief was a home, and Eleanor Gray was in it, and her daughters were in it, and all the long silent months of a man learning to live inside his own loss had become, without his fully planning it, the beginning of something he had stopped believing was possible for him. It was not a perfect life. It would have hard days and complications, and the slow work of 2 people learning each other's sharp edges without drawing blood.
There would be court dates and federal proceedings, and a town still deciding what it thought, and a mother who might never fully choose her daughter, and all the ordinary, irreducible difficulty of real things. But Eleanor was here, and Iris was reaching for the light.
And Rose would wake up in the morning to the sound of her mother's voice, and a man who would carry her into a courtroom without being asked, because some things you simply do when they need doing. And Liam Morgan had learned, again, what he had briefly forgotten, that a life is not built from the absence of pain, but from what you choose to build in spite of it. He had chosen this. So had she. That was enough. That was everything.